Welcome back. I think this is the most significant story I have seen to date, quite frankly. It ties everything together. And it comes from humansarefree.com. Social distancing is based on a computer model created by a 15-year-old as part of a science fair project where she came in third place. This is what is being used to shut us down. Who was it that grabbed this thing? The Bush administration, Chertoff at the Department of Homeland Security, the CDC. Here's how the story unfolds. And actually, they picked it up. It originally came from the Albuquerque Journal, where the science project was held. A May 2nd article in the Albuquerque Journal. This story needs to be picked up and echoed everywhere, people. This is part of the unbelievable fraud and control that has been perpetrated on us, that we need to unravel this. We need to shine this light on these cockroaches, and we need to make them scramble back where they came from. Albuquerque Journal. The hysteria about social distancing is not based on scientific evidence or clinical medical trials. How would you feel if you learned that your normal way of life has been completely upended based on a computer model created by a 15-year-old Albuquerque, New Mexico high school student named Laura Glass? Glass, along with her dad, Robert, who is a government scientist then working at Sandia National Labs, cooked up a homebrew computer model for a science and engineering fair, May 2006. And I got to say, as somebody who has dealt with computer models from college on the rest of my life, I have no respect for computer models. I have no respect for weather predictions. I have zero respect for the climate predictions, no respect for these pandemic predictions that I've seen them lie through one supposed pandemic after the other. But her father was a government scientist at Sandia National Labs, and he was working on computer models for the National Infrastructure Simulation and Analysis Center, showing how people come into contact with each other during everyday life. Now, let me pause here for a second. This is not in the article. Let me give you some background on why government scientists be interested in how people come into contact with each other. I said before this thing began, there was an article out. It was Babel Streets was the company. The app was called Locate X, and they were saying, oh, look, we just came up with a new thing, and it might be very applicable to doing contact tracing and things like that. This is, it might be creepy in any other context, but, you know, since we have a pandemic and all, this could be really useful now. They've been working on this stuff, as I pointed out, since the late 1990s. As the internet, originally a PSYOP project, is proposed by a DARPA psychologist, J.C.R. Licklider. He called it the Intergalactic Computer Network. They shortened that up to Internet. For years, many of us were working on things, you know, DARPANet was what we used. Then they changed it to ARPANET and so forth. And then it became the Internet. When it became practical because of switching equipment in the late 90s, getting up to speed, the CIA was so ecstatic about that they came out of the closet and they openly created their own venture capital firm called In-Q-Tel. But that wasn't all that the military-industrial complex and the spook society did. They put NSA and other personnel, DARPA personnel and so forth, on the board of directors of many venture capital firms that pick the people who now control our speech and the internet. And at the same time, they began a branch of science called geospatial intelligence that was going to map out your movements, map out who you come in contact with. This is probably this guy, Robert Glass, the projects that he was working on, where he was mapping out and doing computer simulation of people coming into contact with each other. That was probably under the related to geospatial intelligence, because this has been very, very rapidly moving out. Military's been using it, and that's what they'll talk about. Oh, we have to do this because we've got to find those terrorists everywhere, right? Palantir, big company involved in this. A lot of military contracts and so forth, and now they're getting into the contact tracing here because the instruments that will protect us abroad are going to become instruments of tyranny at home. That was told to us by the founders of this country, the one who wrote the Bill of Rights, because you see, this isn't about technology. This is about human nature. Human nature hasn't changed. And what happens to people in power has not changed. And the desire to control other people has not changed. The technology has made all of those evil aspects of human nature far more dangerous. But the technology has anesthetized us to that, even including the people who developed the technology. Oh, well, gee, it's a problem. I like to solve problems. Give me that problem. I can solve it. Right? That's the fatal conceit of so many engineers. So when we look at this and we look at what this guy is doing and we see the mainstream media, when China was doing all this stuff, no, they didn't invent it. It was invented by our own government 25 years ago. They're just now saying, well, it was creepy when China was doing the biometric surveillance and tracking and tracing of everybody, looking at their political and religious beliefs and punishing them if they did this or did that or didn't do this or didn't do that, the social credit system. But we can use that here as contact tracing, and we've got to do it now because we've got COVID-19 and everything has to change, right? No, they're not reacting. They're enacting a plan that was put in place 20 years ago. And for all this time, you've had activity-based intelligence, you've had human domain analysis, HDA, ABI. That geospatial intelligence is the fastest growing part of the intelligence community. The spying on you. That's what this is all about. FISA is just the tip of the spear, folks. It's really irrelevant if you don't talk about the context of geospatial intelligence and how they're rolling this out in contact tracing. But back to this story. So this guy at Sandia Labs, and he's working on computer models that are going to be looking at how people come into contact with each other every day. And they probably got somebody else with compartmentalization that's looking on how he can analyze people's religious beliefs and their political beliefs. And then another guy is talking about how we can roll out the punishments, Chinese style. But this is 20 years ago. Actually, 15 years ago that this came to light. So his daughter, Laura Glass, as typically happens, as we all know as parents, right? The parents do a great deal of helping with the kids who are doing their science fair projects, right? So it's like, oh, Dad, I got to do this. I got an idea for this. Laura Glass used his data, his computer models, to project how high school students could possibly transmit infectious diseases. Her model, quote unquote, it's actually his model, suggested that high school students could easily infect huge swaths of a population. So to put a stop to those contacts would hypothetically save lives. That was the bottom line. We've got to save lives, so we'll do social distancing. Miss Glass appears to have no understandings of the benefits of herd immunity. She's not a scientific expert. She's a high school student, 15 years old. Yeah, we're going to ignore the epidemiologists from Stanford. We're going to ignore the people who have looked at how the CDC has lied to us with statistics, inflated data in one direction or the other to get their policies put in. We're going to ignore all that, and we're going to go to a model that was put in by a 15-year-old high school student who, by the way, got third place in the medicine and health category. I mean, we're not even talking about third place in the overall science fair, third place in that category. Nevertheless, even though she got third place in it, her father's connections with the government came up. Somehow, the Department of Homeland Security, always worried about public health, right? The Department of Homeland Security under Bush, these 9/11 people, they found out about it. And so he gets a call from Homeland Security requesting a briefing for then Secretary Michael Chertoff, the guy who was part of the underwear bomber false flag incident. Surprisingly enough, he just had all of those body scanners ready and inventory to roll out after that event. We'll talk more about what happens next and how the CDC got involved when we come back. Stay with us. All right, let's pick back up on this tale that is almost too strange to believe. Again, Albuquerque, New Mexico, the Albuquerque Journal. A father working at Sandia National Labs doing computer modeling on tracing how people come in contact with each other. And I gave you the context for what was probably involved in that contract. And his daughter has a science fair project. So, oh, well, we could do this and we could put it in the context of disease and passing that on. And that's where this social distancing came from. because after she won third place in the medicine category, medicine and health category, third place in the high school science fair, her father gets a call from the Department of Homeland Security, and they wanted to know, we wanted to have him come up and brief them on how this third-rate high school science project could be used to control the population. He received a call from Homeland Security requesting a brief for Secretary Michael Chertoff. Now, this guy, Michael Chertoff, the first Homeland Security Secretary, no, actually, I think he was he the second? There was some guy that had, anyway, regardless, Michael Chertoff was the guy who, after he left DHS, he went to a company that made the naked body scanners. And after we had that other false flag, the underwear bomber, and we had a lawyer who was on the flight. Yeah, there's Chertoff. We had a lawyer who was on the flight, said, yeah, I saw a guy with a suit. And then there was this other guy, the guy who was the underwear bomber. He looked like he was totally out of it. He was like drugged up or drunk or something. He's like this homeless guy, all scruffy and everything. And this guy, well-dressed guy in a suit, goes up and he talks to the people of the plane, and he takes care of getting him on the plane and so forth. They said, I thought that was very suspicious. I pointed it out to my wife. That lawyer's name is Haskell, right? Was his name Kurt Haskell, I think? Anyway, we've interviewed him multiple times here. I think he's left the country now because he went public with a story. He said the same guy then turned out to be the underwear bomber, and he was so incompetent he couldn't light his shoe or whatever it was, or his underwear. And he said, this is all very suspicious. As a matter of fact, the underwear bomber's lawyers called Haskell as a witness, and he was going to testify, but to keep that from happening, they gave him a sweetheart deal and said, no, we don't want your testimony. We don't want you in court. So they gagged that whole thing. And so this Michael Chertoff, who was at the time not selling, by the way, the solution to the underwear bomber, as we all know, was the naked body scanners. And they already had them manufactured. Surprise, surprise. They'd anticipated that threat. Smart guys. And they had manufactured a whole bunch of these and had them in the warehouses ready to roll out after this happened on Christmas. And so by the beginning of the year, we had these naked body scanners rolling out. And by that fall, InfoWars is championing a opt-out campaign. Said, all right, you can opt out of this and tell them to pat you down. And do it on Thanksgiving Day. And on Thanksgiving Day, what happened on the busiest travel day of the year? The TSA just shut down the naked body scanners, and they said, we don't have to pat you. Just go on in. They just shut it down to shut down that protest. And so that Michael Chertoff gets this guy in for a briefing. The Bush White House is holding a cabinet-level counter-bioterrorism briefing. And, of course, no idea was too loony to consider, writes humansarefree.com, who picked up this story from the Albuquerque Journal. Glass's briefing suggested that whole segments of society should be shut down based on his daughter's computer model. The idea of locking down huge swaths of the nation in an event of a virus outbreak met with a lot of pushback, even within the Bush administration. But ultimately, the CDC made it official policy in February of 2007. So they've been rolling this thing out. The Model State Emergency Health Powers Act was written just a couple of months before they pulled off 9/11. Then when they pulled off 9/11, they said, we could have a bioterror attack, anthrax or something like that, which eventually they did mail live anthrax, the military and these labs that are funded by Fauci's NIH, Francis Collins' NIH. They eventually did do stuff like that, but they said, somebody could do it maliciously instead of stupidly, like we do. Maybe they do it maliciously as well. And so they said, we need to push out this model for legislation that you can enact in the various states. And so they did. And a lot of states passed a lot of laws, which we are now suffering under. And that is the basis for their presumed legal authority, even though it's in defiance of the Constitution. And so that kind of stuff was being set up right around 2001. So enter in as they're trying to roll this out and expand it gradually. As I pointed out, for 20 years, they've been holding annual simulations telling all the bureaucrats and officials, here's the simulation, here's how this all starts, accidentally or maliciously or whatever. And everybody died because you didn't use draconian enough measures and you didn't rush a vaccine that was untested onto the public and so forth. They have fake news broadcasts that give them updates, so they make some decisions and then they run this through, and then they always make sure that at the end they understand that they've got to rush vaccines out without any testing, and they've got to do every kind of draconian measure. And so here's one of the draconian measures that they were putting in place. February 2007, CDC says, all right, we'll use this third-rate high school science fair project as the model for what we're going to do. And they called it the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And of course, being the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex, they give it a three-letter acronym, NPI. NPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions. First time it's been implemented is now, but it will not be the last. And Mr. Glass, the father of the 15-year-old high school student, waxed philosophical about the carnage that's been wrought by his and his daughter's lockdown computer model, as reported by the Albuquerque Journal. Anything new is difficult, he said. You have to train people to do this well without freaking out and calling each other names. Yeah, and of course, that's very easy for him to say, as Humans Are Free points out, because he's pulling down a fat government pension check, maybe even fatter, because he gave them exactly what they wanted.
We're living in insanely dangerous times, and I told folks going back 3 months ago, I'm not buying storable food because I'm worried about the COVID-19 virus. I'm worried about the food shortages and the economic collapse. And now it's admitted that a chain reaction has begun that's already caused food shortages and the collapse of farms and ranches across the United States, and it's even worse in the third world. So I hope Trump, with his initiatives, can clean this up and fix it. But with the election fraud and the COVID-19, all the wars, and the third world collapsing and everything else that's going on, now is the time to get storable foods because they'll last for 25 years. They're in easily toteable bags. It's high quality food, and it's good to have that box checked off to be ready. And it funds the InfoWars. So we have storable food available again. InfoWarsStore.com, or call toll-free 888-253-3139. But whatever you do, get prepared and get ready because the globalists want you dependent on them. They do not want you to be self-sufficient. Get your storable food at InfoWarsStore.com right now while you still can.